Live stream audio test, 1, 2.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's 2 o'clock. The inquiry is resumed, so welcome back, everyone. Just in case anyone, I can see it doesn't look as though there's anyone in the public gallery here, but there may be people watching on live stream for the first time. So I just very briefly say that my name's David Wildsmith. I'm a chartered engineer and chartered town planner. I've been appointed by the Secretary of State to hold this inquiry and to determine this appeal, which is made by Persimmon Homes, Severn Valley, under Section 78 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990, against a decision by North Somerset Council to refuse planning permission for a residential development of 60 dwellings, use class C3, with supporting infrastructure and enabling works, including new vehicular access with Moor Road, public open space, landscaping and infrastructure on land at Moor Road, Yatton, North Somerset. Now, the inquiry was adjourned on the 22nd of February to allow the ecology witnesses to discuss various matters and to allow Natural England to be consulted on a revised planting plan. So, briefly then, to go through what I've received during that adjournment, I received the following documents. I'll just check whether I've got a complete list here. I firstly had a statement of intent from the ecology witnesses. Then I received an ecology statement of common ground. I've had a consultation response from Natural England. I've had an addendum proof of evidence from Mr. Phillips on behalf of the council, and an addendum proof of evidence from Mr. Clarkson for the appellant, and an updated shadow HRA. I asked if I could have a hard copy version of that because it was a little bit too bulky for me to get the printing done in the time scale. So, thank you, Mr. Banner. Thank you. There were also two Excel spreadsheets, HEP and Biodiversity Metric 3.0. So I think that's all that I'd received on the ecology front, as it were. Any disagreement from the parties? Okay, thank you. So just moving on then, I also asked to be updated on any developments or changes on the housing land supply situation, not simply because of the passage of time since the inquiry was adjourned, but obviously I know that some of you have been involved in other proceedings in that interval. So I think I've got three further documents here. I've got a rebuttal proof of evidence from Ms. Richards relating to the Farley Farm inquiry. I've got a response from Mr. Patterson-Neal to further council evidence, and I've also got an addendum to the statement of common ground dealing with housing land supply. Although I should say on that one, the version I've got hasn't been signed, so I don't know whether that is the up-to-date and agreed version. If so, perhaps a signed page can be handed in at some stage.
Yes, and it is agreed, so we'll get it signed.
Okay, thank you. So I think that was all I had to say there. There was a consequential point, though, I just wanted to make, that in light of the additional ecology evidence, I didn't know whether the parties had given thought to any changes or alterations to any of the conditions. We obviously had a conditions session at the first part of the inquiry, but if I can just raise that now, and I'm sure you'll move on to that when... Yeah. Okay, I saw your microphone was flashing then. Is that a bad sign? Oh, I've got a thumbs up from the back, so I'm not quite sure. I say we're in this position where those of us in the room are usually able to hear everything okay, but it's just, it's something I've done, is it? Have I got something?
Before, and we did solve it by your pressing buttons. Mine's good.
Perfect, yes.
Yes.
So should I? Yeah, I think I forgot which one to press, so I pressed a few random ones. Okay, so we're off. Good. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that whatever you were saying was being heard on the live stream. Thank you. So, is there anything from either of the parties then?
Shall
before
I
we go
begin?
on? Yeah.
And I hope this is helpful. So you will recall that when the council lodged its evidence on ecology, there were essentially two concerns raised by Mr. Phillips on the authorities' behalf. They were that, first of all, the scheme would adversely affect the SAC, and secondly, that there would be a net biodiversity loss rather than gain as a result of the appellant's proposals. Now, there was a little bit of toing and froing around exactly what we were dealing with. Happily, that's all been resolved. We now know exactly what we're dealing with. And on that basis, we consulted Natural England, together with the appellants, who have produced a letter, as you've recorded, and that letter makes it absolutely clear that the first objection that was raised by the council, namely the potential impact on the Mendip North Somerset Bat special area of conservation, there is no objection to the scheme. So the council's first concern has been resolved.
Okay.
Unequivocally, unambiguously, we cannot pursue that point by reason of what Natural England have had to say, and Mr. Phillips accepts that. Secondly, the appellants and the council have agreed that the scheme as now formulated, plans Y12 to Y14 in February 2022, do indicate a net loss of biodiversity in relation to habitats, and also when you put habitats together with hedgerows, there's still a net loss. But we have to concede, and we do concede, that that net loss can be made good off-site by the provision of other habitat, potentially a commuted sum, that can be secured by condition, and that in the circumstances, therefore, sir, there can be no doubt that Mr. Phillips's second concern, that the scheme would ultimately produce a net loss of biodiversity, has been overcome, or is capable of being overcome, I perhaps ought to say, through a condition. So, where does that leave us? Well, you will have read Mr. Phillips's addendum, and you may have thought, as I did, what precisely does this mean? Because Mr. Phillips does identify what I shall paraphrase as significant concerns, significant residual concerns. But the issue that arises is this: if there is a better scheme, as Mr. Phillips suggested, which is that one avoids developing the orchard field entirely, the southern field entirely, if that produces significantly improved biodiversity results, is that to be compared with an acceptable scheme in the form of the appeal proposals, or an unacceptable scheme in the form of the appeal proposals? Now, Mr. Phillips has clarified for me that by reason of the impact on the SAC having been resolved, and by reason of his concern about biodiversity net gain having been resolved, he would concede that the appeal proposals must be judged acceptable from an ecological point of view. Now that's important because it means that insofar as not developing the southern field might produce a better scheme, the comparator is nonetheless an acceptable scheme. And obviously, sir, you will know this, my own friend certainly does, so I don't want to try and take a poor point, because it would go very badly for the local authority. In planning, all that is required is that an applicant should deliver an acceptable scheme. The fact that one might contemplate and contrive better schemes is interesting but strictly irrelevant. So, notwithstanding Mr. Phillips thinks that if one were not to develop the southern field, one could produce a better result in terms of the biodiversity impact, we concede that because the comparator is an acceptable scheme, it is not material to have regard to that theoretical better scheme. And I make that formal concession. And the result of that is that there is now no outstanding issue between the parties in respect of the scheme's impact on ecological interests. Putting it another way, the Council accepts that the appellant scheme is acceptable in ecological terms, and that it therefore complies with core strategy policy CS4 and development management plan policy DM8. It doesn't mean, of course, that the council ceases to contest the appeal. There are other matters between us, but in relation to ecology, that is the end of the matter. And it's been possible to get to that position, sir, thanks to the adjournment that you granted, and thanks to the parties' ecologists working well together, which makes a refreshing change. I hope that assists you, sir. Have I said anything that leaves you in any doubt as to the position?
No, I don't think so. I think obviously I'll hear from Mr. Banner as well, but yes, not quite where I was expecting to be, as it were, but thank you for giving me a clear outline of the council's current position on
Thank
that.
you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Banner.
Well, obviously, we're very grateful for the council and Mr. Leader reflecting on the position and reaching that view. There's not really a huge amount, if anything, I can add, other than just to note, for the avoidance of doubt, obviously it's our view that this scheme is better than the alternative for the reasons Mr. Clark, but given we've got to the stage where it's acceptable and that's enough, we don't need to thrash that about through evidence. You've got the written evidence, Mr. Clarkson, you understand his view in terms of the trees, etc., in the orchard. So we probably need to then have a discussion on where we go from here, effectively, if at all.
Yeah, where do we go from here? Well, what is still outstanding then?
I think to sort out conditions, sir, in relation to ecological matters, and we have got a draft that I think my learned friend has a copy of too, and I wonder if we might hand a copy to the inspector.
I mean, just to be clear, I think our understanding, subject to your view, sir, is this latest position negates the need to call ecological evidence today. We still are seeking closing submissions on Wednesday because we frankly need the time to write them. But what's left today is to discuss the conditions and obviously deal with anything that you think is appropriate to deal with. But that's where we've got to.
So am I understanding that correctly, that clearly on the basis of what I've just heard, there's no point or need to hear ecological evidence?
Correct, because there's no longer any ecological related basis for refusal, effectively, is the
I think
council's
what
position.
we ought to do is reduce what I've said to a side of A4.
Yes.
Get it signed.
Helpful.
Put it in front of you, and then that makes the position absolutely clear for you going forwards.
And it should go on the website too, so that members of the public are aware if they're not watching now.
Of course, yes. And let me just, okay, so this is some additional
Yes.
conditions. So we'll move on to that, but just so I can pick up on what you said a moment ago, Mr. Banner, closings on Wednesday. Are you still wanting, but because obviously I was envisaging we'd have this afternoon, some
quite,
ecological,
indeed.
Tomorrow morning, so I was going to
Yes.
give you Tuesday
Yes.
afternoon, Wednesday morning if need be.
Yeah. We'll still need tomorrow to write, not least because it will require a little bit of adjustment in terms of where that leaves us. Mr. Lee's
So we can't do closings tomorrow?
No, we can't.
I'm not going to pressure
No,
anyone for
no,
that, but I just need
we
to be
can't.
clear on that. Yeah.
So I'm happy about that. I've obviously discussed it with Mr. Banner, and yeah, if it's to be Wednesday, it's to be Wednesday.
Yes.
Okay.
If it helps you to know, I think we've got to the position that you won't need to hear any submissions on costs now. So that's
Helpful.
the
Thank
less
you.
thing to worry
Yes.
about on Wednesday.
I'm trying to think what I can usefully do with some of my time tomorrow,
Yes.
and I may well take the opportunity to revisit the site.
Yes.
In terms of access to the site, can I just be clear, would I be allowed on the site without the
I'm seeing a thumbs up, so
landowners?
yes.
Okay, that makes sense there then, thank you. Right, so I've just been handed this about conditions. The first time I've seen it. Does someone want to take me through it, please?
Well,
do
sir, it may be that you would like to take a little time to read it, and then perhaps we could take you through it when you've had a chance to look at it. It's always difficult to read things on the hoof, isn't it? And they're not, it's not a
Yeah.
short
No,
piece of writing.
no, it looks quite dense.
It is, isn't it? So would you like to take a short time to read it? Then what I'm going to ask Mr. Phillips to do, and doubtless assisted by Mr. Clarkson, is take you through the thinking that's gone into this rather intricate set of words.
Okay.
Is that all right, sir?
Yes, I'll just have a quick glance at this. What I wanted to know, having looked through the addendum proofs, I can just put my hand on them now. I think it was the
Right, okay, so this is...
the reference which had been previously made by Mr. Clarkson, but was then repeated in the addendum proof about the possibility of what he terms construction phase mitigation. And I didn't know whether that, I was going to ask whether that was something that had been thought of in terms of any conditions. So I don't know if that is included in the document that I've just been given now. Just so that you're clear, it was 3.1.7 in Mr. Clarkson's addendum proof, where he talks about the inclusion of temporary vegetated fences across hedgerow H3 to be installed on a nightly basis during construction, which I understood why that was being suggested, but I wasn't sure how it was intended that that would be secured. So I'll say no more now. I've raised it so you can discuss it while we have this short adjournment. It's 2:20. Let's adjourn until 2:45, and I'll come back then and hear what you want to tell me about the conditions. So I'll adjourn then now, and we'll resume at 14:45.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Well, the inquiry is resumed, ladies and gentlemen. So I've had the opportunity to look through the suggestions, and I realise that I've now had an amended list of the full conditions. I'm saying full. I realise that the earlier list schedule that I had went up to condition 29, I think, and I've just been given a set that goes to, where are we, to 30, and I can see that the last point on the email, biodiversity, net gain and LEMP. Well, sorry, I'll say less, and I'll ask the parties to explain the current position with regards to the suggested conditions. I think that's going to be easier than me trying to work my way through that.
Thank you, sir. I think Mr. Clarkson's going to deal with it from our side. He's been
Okay.
track changes.
So. Okay, so picking up on the email that you would have been looking through, I'm going to go in the order of the conditions rather than in the order of the email.
Okay.
The Kemp, which Mr. Phillips suggested, I've suggested is better incorporated into condition 7 rather than condition 6. We've separated out the Kemp and the biodiversity protection measures required during construction into two separate conditions because they're typically prepared by two different people.
Yeah.
And so we've incorporated the details of Mr. Phillips's suggested condition for the Kemp into condition 7, the biodiversity protection plan.
So is that in, obviously I've only just seen this now, so that's now in condition 7
It's in track changes, sir.
of this version that I've got here. Sorry, just let me make sure I've got the right one here. Okay. Right, okay.
Then turning to condition 11, in this latest document you've been provided with, this is an existing condition which picks up the landscape and ecological management plan requirements, and I think the proposal is that this broadly covers what Mr. Phillips has suggested, and there is no amendment required to the condition that was proposed.
Okay.
Which then brings us to condition 30, which is the final condition on biodiversity net gain. The condition is broadly as Mr. Phillips had suggested, with a couple of minor amendments, one being the removal of the statement but not limited to, and the second being point A, which is the confirmation that 4 biodiversity units would be secured in accordance with the statement of common ground that was issued on the 1st of April to yourself. Just to provide a sort of a clarity and certainty within the condition, make it unambiguous as to what was required.
Okay, is that an additional point there?
That's an additional point, point A.
Oh, yeah, just went to I before, okay.
The condition also references the LEMP, which is secured under condition 11, rather than having to repeat that information again as part of the discharge of this condition. Other than that, I think we're very satisfied that that's a sensible condition and secures what is required.
Yep. Okay. Okay, so Mr. Leader and Mr. Phillips, are they content with those slight tweaks, as it were?
Yes, those clarifications are helpful, so that's agreed from my perspective.
Okay. Thank you. And the point that I raised before the adjournment about the construction period mitigation, that when I looked again at the construction environmental management plan, there seemed to be scope within those various measures there for such measures to be agreed with the council. So as far as I could see, the condition as worded here, although not specifically covering those matters in a named form, they could indeed, when the plan's been submitted to and approved in writing by the council. So that's to my mind, that addressed the query that I had on that point. So,
if I might add, sir, that the requirement for that fencing has also been added into the shadow HRA that I've provided you with. Because,
right.
It was an additional measure, and I felt it important that the shadow HRA was consistent with what was discussed in my proof of evidence.
Right, thank you. Well, thank you for that. Is there anything more on conditions then that needs to be discussed? No. Thank you. Well, as I say, not quite how I was envisaging the afternoon and tomorrow panning out, but it's helpful that the adjournment provided that opportunity for fruitful discussions between the parties. So all good, as it were. I don't think there's anything more then that we need to do, unless I've overlooked anything, until we move to closing subs.
To update you on the 106, it's been signed and engrossed, and all the legalities dealt with. It's with the council, physically with Ms Richards in her hand.
Okay, so that can be handed in indeed. Any time. Okay, thank you.
That's all.
Right, so the only thing that I would say again was, because of the way I'd got it in my head that how things were going to pan out, I was envisaging that we'd be here today, a bit of tomorrow, to hear evidence, and then closing subs on Wednesday. You're telling me you'd still prefer that?
Yes, sir. Yes, appreciating it. It means that you've got a bit of downtime, but
yes, I mean, I'm just sort of grappling with the fact that in effect we've now got a blank day within the inquiry, which I would have sought to avoid if at all possible. If you're telling me that the way things have panned out, it's not really possible to retrieve any of that time, then okay, we'll still have a Wednesday closings at say 9:30.
If that suits you, sir, that suits us.
Content with that?
Yes.
Okay, well, as I say, I will take the opportunity then to refresh myself on the site tomorrow. Leaving things in this room, that's a practical matter. Is that so they can be left here until Wednesday if need be?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Right, okay, well, I think that if... I should have asked for an attendance list, shouldn't I? Right at the very beginning of this session, I can see that there is one doing the round, so that's good. So if you'll all make sure that you've put your details on that, and then if I can have that back. If the 106 is available to be handed in, did you want to do that now, or did you want to leave that till
Might as well.
Wednesday? Okay.
That's exactly my thought.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah. So attendance list as well. Thank you. Lovely. Okay. So I don't think there's anything more then until we meet again on Wednesday. So thank you. I'll adjourn then now. We'll resume at 9:30 on Wednesday.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you then.